Medinat Abu, the temple of Ramses III, the last king of the Egyptian epoch. The alley of pillars barely conceals the entrance to the inner sanctuary, which has retained its original colors over the millennia. Medinat Abu is considered one of the most magnificent collections of wall paintings which remain from that epoch. The Ramesseum, funerary temple of Ramses II. Its pillars tumbled over each other like giant dominoes during a heavy earthquake. The Colossi of Memnon used to mark the entrance to a temple built by Amenephis III, but was destroyed completely. Let us go back to the east bank of the Nile. Here we find the Temple of Luxor, its fine stonework surrounded by this grand city which is constantly expanding and improving in its capacity to host ever-growing numbers of tourists. At sunset, earth and sky join colors, a deep ochre, typical of these regions of Egypt. At the same time, when the dwindling sunlight throws its last rays gently upon the rocks, contrasts become more pronounced. And as the sun turns mauve, the Nile, it is said, assumes the same color. Here we see again, as before, the greatest temple of the world, Karnak, 100 acres, which host one of the most spectacular events in Egypt, a pulsating poem of sound and light. This spectacle unfolds itself in 5 stages. The first in front of the first pylon between an alley of ram-headed sphinx. The second takes place in an open courtyard between the first and second pylon. The next 2 stages take us through the Hall of Pillars into the heart of the complex. Finally, we find ourselves at the edge of the Holy Lake, admiring for a short time the dwindling light of the fading sun. Ladies and gentlemen, the stage is set for one of the most magnificent performances in the Blue Night, the extraordinary sound and light show at the Temple of Karnak. Text by Gaston Bonheur and music by Georges Delerue.
May the evening soothe and welcome you, O travelers from Upper Egypt.
We'll travel no further because you are come. Here, you are at the beginning of time.
Here was conceived and lived the great week of the creation of the world and the separation of the earth from the waters. You are at the house of the Father.
This house of the Father, each pharaoh thought of himself as a son and wished to leave his mark upon it.
Each added, superimposed, overdid, outdid, through a span of 20 centuries.
Result is this fabulous labyrinth of facades and passages, esplanades and corridors, perspectives and detours to which only priests and Pharaoh had access.
But the Egyptian is at ease in the circumvolutions of the divine. He is at home with the science of the beyond. He has a taste for side exits, secret passages, concealed staircases, the phosphorescent gloom of tombs. Vade-mecums, the guidebooks for the journey which accompanied the mummy, are called Book of the Dead, Book of the Gateways, Book of the Caverns, Book of the Night. They are the only books ever to attempt to produce maps of the other world.
Solemn threshold you have just crossed was forbidden to common mortals.
The city of God was a fortress where a whole garrison of mystic votaries watched over the great divine scheme of things. Sunrises, eclipses of the moon, dynastic chains, the bark of night, the balms of immortality.
Father is like unto an aged shepherd. His right hand holds the shepherd's crook that gathers in the dust of the stars. His left hand fondles a wild ram walking with him. He is the God of the first day. It is he who is called Ammon. The very mention of his name, priests bow the head, and mere mortals prostrate themselves in the dust. Sometimes Ram and God blend together, and a curly-browed sphinx can be seen leading the flock, like this one. The sculptor has fashioned in multiplicity to guard the court of Karnak.
Hear me, I who am merely the surveyor of these ruins. I have measured these crumbling avenues in every direction, these tumbled esplanades, these terraces, and these sanctuaries. I found the ancient flood peaks of the Nile, inscribed on a scale which it's only fitting to call Nilometer. These masses of symmetrical architecture that frame the stairs, masking the inner temples, were called pylons by the first visiting travelers. It is a name to describe a pillar on a gigantic scale. Most of these pylons are hollow, honeycombed with inner stairways leading to the ramparts of heaven. These pylons have exterior sockets into which festive banners were fixed with hooks of bronze. But don't try to count the columns, the colossi, the sphinxes, the obelisks, or the capitals. Try rather with every step you take in this 20-century-old worksite to hear the whispered response of the ever-present God.
It was here in Karnak that he who is called Ammon sat upon a hillock and thought the world into being during the floods of the month of July.
This land of Upper Egypt, upon which the most grandiose structure of the world rises, this land is said to have been the first to have risen from the primeval waters. It was upon this land, where the swarms of wild duck alighted, the only land above the floodwaters, that men have built the city of God, for the glory of his creation.
Time of its full splendor, this citadel could only be reached by a royal canal and a sacred avenue. The pharaoh, aboard his barge of glory, could moor here, welcomed on the holy quayside in the shade of the sycamores by the pontiff and his numberless retinue of priests with their feather fans.
Do not be overwhelmed by the sheer size of these ruins.
The citadel that arose here was not designed on the scale of men, but on the grand scale of God, from whom all things flowed. The drought and the flood, the granaries and the plagues, dreams and power, death and survival.
The great French archaeologist Champollion, who had awakened the cackling, twittering farmyard of the hieroglyphics rather in the manner of the Sleeping Beauty, when he came here, was amazed. Listen.
All the pomp and magnificence of the pharaohs appears at Karnak. All the noblest and finest works of man. No other ancient people has conceived the art of architecture on so large, grandiose, and sublime a scale as the ancient Egyptians. They thought in terms of men 100 feet in stature.
And if one of you this evening were to voice the question that you are whispering in your hearts, who art thou, Amun? The answer would seep from these walls, these lintels, these pedestals, these secret chambers, these piled ruins. For the answer is written everywhere in 1,000 different hieroglyphics.
I am the father of fathers, the mother of mothers, and the bull of the 7 celestial kine. I opened my mouth to speak in the midst of silence. I caused to be that men should have a path on which to tread. I opened the eyes of all that they might see. My right eye is the day. My left eye is the night. And the waters of the Nile spurt from my sandals.
Amun has held this fortress from the 12th dynasty, but with one eclipse, the time of a dissenting pharaoh, the time of a pharaoh who was a poet, the time of Akhenaten, who invented humanism, the time of his love for the all-too-human Nefertiti, whose beauty still haunts us even today.
Amon, the father of all things, had for wife the goddess Mut, who sat a little below him, wearing a royal headdress of vulture feathers. Near to the father and the mother is the son, Khans, standing rigid as a mummy, with a crescent moon picked out upon his oblong head. They made up the Karnak triad, the Holy Family, for whom, and for 2,000 years, ceaselessly, complex fortifications were built by the hands of men.
Here in this place, I, Seti, built the resting place for the holy barks beside the avenue. It is made up of 3 contiguous sandstone chapels. The chapel of Ammon's bark is in the center. The chapel of Hones is to the east. The chapel of Mut to the west. I believe this edifice is worthy of Ammon, and worthy long to bear witness to the glory of Seti II.
Men always believe they are playing the last act of their long history. Each pharaoh believed he had completed the city of God.
I, Ramesses III, conceived that more than one resting place was needed for the sacred barks of the Holy Family. So, midway between the sanctuary and the river, I brought into being this edifice, a veritable temple with pylon guarded by colossi, peristyle courtyard, pillared hall, and sanctuary. Henceforth, it shall be here that the 40 tonsured priests in 8 ranks of 5 shall halt, bearing the ark of God along the way to the landing stage when the time comes for the gods' journey to Luxor, for the festival of Opet upon the high waters. And my temple shall also tell how I conquered the peoples of Asia and Africa.
Yet one day, even the temple of Ramses III was no more than an edifice in a corner of the vast courtyard where we are this evening. And during the 2nd month of flood, there was the beautiful festival of Opet.
Then, as every summer, we would have witnessed the passing by of the 3 barks of the Holy Family, borne aloft on the strong arms of men. The bark of Ammon, decorated at prow and poop with ram's heads.
The bark of Mut, his wife, decorated with female figures wearing necklaces.
And the bark of their son Khons, decorated with 2 falcon heads surmounted by the crescent moon. For the bark is the symbol of the movement of the world, the pedestal of God. It is the throne of the pharaoh, the instrument of war and of building. The civilization that erected the columns and colossi at Karnak was a river civilization.
It was by bark that the rose-colored granite, the diorite and alabaster were brought here, each flood bearing tons of raw stone to be shaped and molded on the everlasting work site.
There is something profoundly moving in comparing the tremulous, almost fluid inspiration of the Karnak workmen and the hardness of the stone in which they wish to immortalize the bending of a reed or the drooping wing of a cormorant.
I, Tutankhamun, the youthful pharaoh who re-established Ammon in all his power and glory after the treachery of my brother, I have left behind me in this courtyard nothing but this calcite sphinx.
I, Taharqa, a Nubian reigning late in a crumbling dynasty, built this central pavilion, of which little now remains, but a specimen of the papyrus-capped gracious colonnade and an alabaster block that served as an altar for the divine ark.
I, a pharaoh whose name is lost, So many contradictions are graven on my pedestal. I left the symbolic image of all the pharaohs. This gigantic statue rising against the western side of the second pylon, clasping to its legs the tiny figure of a beloved queen.
And I, Ramesses II, the grand elder of the Ramessid dynasty, the flame of the 19th dynasty, I claim the honor more than 3,000 years ago of having completed this second pylon you are about to pass. At its foot, I placed the stela telling of the victory of Kamoses over the Hyksos from the east. The two of my images watched over the gate of the sanctuary. Only the southern statue has remained intact, but it is enough to keep alive the memory of my august reign. For 67 years, I wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. 3 royal queens shared my bed. The third was the daughter of the Hittite king, the most powerful monarch of Asia Minor. You may measure the vastness of my empire, but to judge the span of my life, know that after her I married 4 of my own daughters, and that the number of my children was 92 boys and 106 girls.
I, a pharaoh of the later period, a king of the twilight, Ptolemy Euergetes II, I built this marvelous gate leading to the chambers of God. The panels are of genuine cedar of the Lebanon, lined with Asian copper. May they open to you this evening and give you access to the most secret, most impressive part of the Karnak labyrinth.
Lofty and mysterious as a petrified oasis, this is the dwelling of Ammon. These are the mighty stone organ pipes of Karnak.
Let's listen a while to the confused hubbub of words that seem to seep from these walls, thick with the inscriptions of signatures and prayers. Let's dream in this forest of symbols.
No one could express our wonder better. The great French Egyptologist Champollion, when he himself came here.
Imagination fails and falls lifeless at the feet of these 134 columns of the Karnak hypostyle chamber.
The columns are all inspired by the umbelliferous papyrus of the river, which brought to Egypt both its grace and its knowledge. Some of the columns are open. That is to say, their capitals are open, while others are closed, like the flowers in the bud. The hypostyle chamber was built by Seti I between the second and third pylons, and he decorated a large part of the walls and columns with reliefs. The decoration was completed by Ramesses II, who used not reliefs this time, but sunken reliefs. This hypostyle chamber is the mother of all the 3 nave basilicas which later were inspired by his plans.
The function of this chamber is essentially both religious and imperial. The physical presence of Ammon was there in the form of a statue transported on a bark. And Pharaoh came here to regenerate his soul, since he reigned over Upper and Lower Egypt. In other words, over the universe, in his quality as son of Ammon.
Let's admire this cluster of columns, in which the architect has striven to capture the very sap of the Nile in the stone. That sap that feeds the giant papyrus clumps, springing from the rich silt, swarming with birds and reptiles. The Nile, so like the Egyptian language, with its poetic vitality flowering even beyond the boundaries of death.
It is dawn, and we can imagine the daily awakening of Egypt, as if her hieroglyphics were suddenly to shake themselves from slumber.
In the depths of the sanctuary, Ammon the god, the creator, is present in the form of his statue. There is the ceremonial for the opening of his mouth, for the mouth orders both men and events. There are polishings, fumigations, repeated anointings, touchings of the face with a fork of silex and an adze, blessing the hoof of an ox. All these solemn rites have literally incorporated the soul of Ammon in its receptacle of sculptured wood.
Pharaoh came into the divine presence this morning. He purified himself in the waters of the sacred lake. He will proceed to awaken the god with his retinue of priests. For the god is still sleeping, as every night, in his tabernacle that is sealed every evening.
Awake, Karnak, queen of the dwellings of the gods and goddesses that inhabit her. Awake, gods and goddesses, to the beauty of this new day. Awake in peace, Ammon, Lord of Karnak.
Seal unsealed. The twin gates of heaven are opening. The twin gates of the earth are swinging wide.
Hail to thee, Ammon, Lord of Thebes, Lord of Lords, Master of Terror, and King of Ka.
Ammon, King of heaven, Creator of the stars.
Thou hast thrown open the horizons and brought all the gods into being.
I worship thee, Ammon.
Full of thy mother, Creator of multitudes, King of the gods, Sovereign of the tall plumes, thou, the great hawk.
Thou who givest the breath of life to all things and instillest joy into the hearts of men.
O Ammon, give me strength and joy. I bear thee 3 bandeaux as an offering, O Lord, that, clad in all thy glory, thou mayest keep watch until the night, and give health and strength to thy son, the Pharaoh, king of the south and north, chief of all thy living creatures, forever.
Here is the white bandeau.
That the light which is thy look may shine.
Here is the green bandeau.
That the life-giving waters may bring flowers and make green the earth.
Here is the red bandeau.
That the earth may be fertile and the blood strong.
That the earth may be fertile and the blood strong.
Pharaoh's incantations are done. The ceremony will continue all day long around the awakened statue with the assistance of a host of priests.
God will be nourished with incense and libations. The remains of the offerings of meat and wine will naturally serve to feed the priests. After the noon libations, God will be entertained with paints, oils, perfumes, and jewels.
And in the evening, after a further purification, the statue will return to its tabernacle, sheltered behind a fresh clay seal applied to the gates.
Now, God is resting. The sun has vanished behind the Theban mountains. Ammon has vanished into the night with the sun, embarking once more upon that dark voyage that is the foretaste of death.
We could still move through the heaped ruins without reaching the heart of the mystery. Pylons, obelisks, vestibules, chambers, colonnades, dynasty after dynasty enlarged and developed the labyrinth of night. Here we must evoke the most ancient pharaohs, like Thutmosis I, Thutmosis III, Amenophis III. But the history of reigns and events seems so insignificant compared to the imperishable testimony of faith. Men are so made that they remember better the invisible than the real.
2,000 years of royal annals, festivals, mourning, battles, love stories, intrigues, expeditions, mingle here like the myriad leaves of a tree. The god Ammon is the tree, and each pharaoh has merely written his name on the leaves.
Here, in a recess of this courtyard, archaeologists brought to light one of their finest discoveries, referred to as the Karnak hiding place. From time to time, to make way for new offerings, the old ones had to be removed. And here, in a single communal grave, a pile of treasure was found. 779 statues of stone, and 17,000 of bronze, not to mention the wooden ones that had not withstood the onslaught of time. Kings, queens, priests, dignitaries, standing, sitting, or kneeling, in black or rose granite, in alabaster or marble, all thrown in pell-mell, and among them, the sublime statue of the great builder Thutmosis III gives us an idea of the prodigious opulence of Karnak.
Our journey to the heart of the night will now take us under the stars.
Faced with the powerful mystery of Ammon and the amazing network of the god's defenses, we feel insignificant, exiled as a mere mortal at the gates of the tomb.
The mortal came to the gates with all his poor life possessed. His black shadow that followed him upon the plaster of the walls, upon the soil of the fields, and the surface of the water. And a strange winged creature, perhaps his soul, sang in his heart.
is time to climb to the high terrace, see Thebes slumbering beside her father, Nile.
Perhaps the open sky will make things clearer to us. This sacred lake, on the banks of which you have come to dream, for one can only understand by dreaming, this mirror set in the rock has reflected the finest firework display of antiquity.
A dazzling gleam that has lasted 20 centuries. As soon as one cluster of stars faded, another pharaoh fired another salvo. And this will be named forever the splendor of Thebes.
For the light that faded to the north at the foot of the pyramids arose again, here upon the Acropolis of the high valley over which Ammon was to reign. And Thebes reconquered Egypt, imposed the force of her arms over the surrounding country, founded merchant exchanges, cemented alliances, and brought to the feet of Ammon the tribute of all the glorious, submissive cities, Byblos, Nineveh, and Babylon.
It has been said that Thebes was the first city, the city of cities. Homer named it the city of 100 gates. For 100 trumpets sounded its fame.
And what did the archaeologist Champollion say?
Thebes is the greatest word in any language.
She spread along the banks of the Nile, a rich capital city, along the horizon of the east bank as far as your eyes can see, enveloping Luxor upstream, and touching the periphery of Karnak downstream with the fronds of her palm trees. Karnak, the obscure, the mysterious, from which she drew the leaven of her power. 100 trumpets shrill thy name, O Thebes, and echo thy beauty. Here, along the Nile, crowded thy palaces, thy public buildings, thy embassies, the villas of thy ministers.
Only the gods have endured. The houses of men, built of fragile clay, have left no trace, have faded like a mirage.
And yet they were pleasant houses. Their floors painted with the lotus flower, their walls with frescoes of flights of wild duck, their wooden galleries, their trellises, their arbors, and their maidens clad in transparent garments.
The cases of papyrus scrolls tell us the titles of the poems that trembled on the maiden's lips.
The lover's sycamore.
Lovers bathing.
Waiting for her love.
Only the cases have come down to us. The papyrus scrolls they contained have reverted to dead leaves. This verse that was found hardly stirs an echo in our memories.
Your love is in my heart like the reed in the arms of the wind.
And the fragile, iridescent image we have of Thebes is the one that the dead have taken with them to the depths of their tombs.
Look now over the river to the west bank, where the sun sets every evening behind the Valley of the Kings.
It is the shore of the dead, the beginning of the beyond.
If some lights are still shining in the necropolis, it means that the embalmers are late at their work.
Their patron is Anubis, the somber god who prowls like a black dog around the cemeteries. Their god is Osiris, who knows all the secrets of the resurrection and watches 70 nights over the mummification workshops and the endless swaths of wrappings.
When the wind blows from the west, the scent of herbs drifts across the water, and a bitter sweetness wreathes about you like the perfume of crushed myrrh.
It was there, in front of you, that the pharaohs, mingling with their people, undertook the laborious journey to eternity. It is there that the Egyptologists found them.
Perhaps they did not quite succeed in conquering death. But isn't it amazing enough that today we can gaze upon the thoughtful parchment faces of the great rulers of Thebes in the depths of their sarcophagi? Ramses the Great, Meremptah, still recognizable after 30 centuries of sleep. The first arrivals in the tomb from the other bank long contemplated the great construction site of Karnak, ceaselessly humming with the activity of their successors.
This is the grand archaeological site where they all brought their stone and their prayers. For this divine city of Karnak, a ceaselessly growing collective work, ceaselessly improved, ceaselessly reshaped, is much more than just a temple. The pharaoh drew from it his legitimacy, his crown, and his energy. He brought to it his homage and his victories. He came to it to seek renewal and strength in his disappointments, to seek comfort and draw the sap of it into his soul. He was a mere leaf on the tree, a tree that plunged its powerful roots through the blocks of stone. We can still almost feel it quivering. We are at the turning point of the 18th and 19th dynasties, more than 3,000 years ago. Before it, every Tutmosis and Amenophis. After it, every Seti and Ramesses. Now, We are at the moment of unbelievable sacrilege and revolution. Amenephis IV changes his name, his god, and his capital.
Above all glories, he set love supreme. And his beloved wife, Nefertiti, shared his dream of a new faith and a new city.
Ammon no longer existed. Even his name was effaced from the monuments. The new god was called Aton.
One God, the Sun, love. The heretical pharaoh took the name of Akhenaton, devoting himself to his new worship, his poems, his prophecies, his new city of El Amarna.
And Karnak seemed to be relegated to the shadows. But the new religion lasted only as long as its inventor. The chisel, ruin, and fire all conspired to obliterate his image.
The new pharaoh was a child.
This child was to restore the ancient worship.
He rekindled the 1,000 lamps of the abandoned temples of Karnak. He took the traditional name, and if his earthly life was short, since he died in his adolescence, his posthumous glory eclipses that of all the others. For his name is Tutankhamun.
His makeshift tomb was dug in the very floor of the Valley of the Kings. Over there.
It escaped the looters for 3,000 years. And in 1922, everything was there.
The sarcophagi, one inside the other. The statues, the jewels of gold, the sacred and profane furniture, the alabasters, the porcelains, that prodigious treasure that still draws the crowds, and that mask encrusted with lapis lazuli and cornelian, which stares at us from the depths of the night with the enigmatic smile of an immortal young man.
We must descend even lower than the tombs to understand the origin of this strange gleam that seems to outlive even the ruins and almost to materialize in the obelisks. Needles of stone torn from the rising sun, often inlaid with an alloy of gold and silver, they stand proudly gleaming above Luxor, above Karnak.
Let us return for a moment to the distant centuries when the world's first great queen, Hatshepsut, was inspired to dedicate 2 golden obelisks to Ammon. Listen.
Behold, I was sitting in my palace, meditating upon the being who created me, when the voice of my heart spoke, telling me to make 2 golden obelisks for him. My spirit took fire, thinking of what the men who would later see these monuments would say. They would say, Why this mountain of gold? But my dream was beyond my power. My 2 obelisks were not of gold, but of single stone, hard granite without a join. And the expedition to bring the stone to me took 7 months.
From the top of my pylon, I can see the largest raft ever built floating down the Nile in the time of the floods. Barks are there to guide it. Flat on its planks are 2 stones of rose granite. They are the obelisks of the Queen. It is the expedition to Aswan returning. Glory to Queen Hatshepsut. May she live forever.
Now the 2 obelisks have been set up. I must finish their dedication. I shall add this. Thinking of future men who will not have seen the realization of my dream of gold, I wish at least that they may be able to say this, that my mouth was excellent in the words that issued from it, and that, even in granite, I never went back on my word.
Torn from their native land, today obelisks rise in all the capitals of the modern world. In Rome, Paris, London, Istanbul, New York.
Above the vain tumult of cities, these stones stand like fingers raised for silence, preserving the tradition of ancient Egypt's meditation.
Farewell, sweet Queen Hatshepsut. Your memory pervades the evening like the fragrance of your incense. You who, to honor Amun, sent an expedition beyond the Red Sea to the kingdom of Punt to seek that precious tree that you succeeded in transplanting to the sacred orchards in Karnak, the incense tree.
Listen to the sounds of Karnak. The silence was deceptive, since the city for 20 centuries has resounded so much to the sound of song and harp that it was almost alive with music.
A papyrus tells us that in the period of Ramesses III, there were 81,322 men in the service of the god Amun. These were divided into 125 categories. They were in charge of the 421,262 animals, the 433 gardens, the 2,395 square kilometers of fields, the 83 ships, the 46 work sites, and the 65 villages belonging to Amun's domain.
This is the secret of Karnak. Here, God is not a thing of solitude, ceremony. God is a hive of activity, a metropolis at work, day and night.
Naturally, there are the baser tasks of the city. The crowded farmyards, the laden trellises, the papyrus presses, and the nobler tasks, the working of gold and silver, the polishing of the columns, the fashioning of the sandstone blocks.
But above all, there is the fabulous machinery of the universe. For God is in charge and is responsible for the functioning of the world.
Upon the terraces, priest astronomers observe the movement of the stars, are responsible for eclipses of the moon and the rising of the sun.
Other wise men, bending over their desks, keep the maps of the empire up to date, and the much more complicated maps of the kingdom of eternity. Watching over the furnaces, others supervised the mysterious metallurgical union of silver and gold into electrum, whose shining plaques would clothe the obelisks.
The passage of time is a permanent care. The year has been divided into 12 months of 30 days, and each month into 3 decans. There are 5 days of respite left to forget the passage of time before a new year returns on the 19th of July.
Each day has been divided into 24 hours. But summer and winter, day and night both have 12 hours.
In summer, the night hours are short, and in winter they stretch out lazily. This implies the permanent labor of many teams around the clepsydras, kinds of water clocks, in which the minutes flow drop by drop.
The flooding of the river, the responses of the oracles, the ever-perfected impedimenta of the dead, the destiny of Pharaoh, the interpretation of dreams. All these are part of the program of Karnak.
And the breath of Ammon turns the machinery of the world in the heart of the forbidden city.
But each year, the harvest done, the grapes gathered, when the new wine rises to the head, Ammon takes a short holiday. On his barge of state, he sets forth for a honeymoon on the river.
He goes to Luxor, where he honeymoons each year with the goddess Amenet.
This is the beautiful festival of Opet. The joyous echoes still seem to come down to us from the depths of time. All the details are inscribed on the walls along the great colonnade at Luxor.
Once again, in this month of Pau-Fi, the people of Thebes are gathering at the gates of Karnak for the grand festival of the god Ammon.
It is enough to hear the laughter, to know that the granaries are full and that the grapes are already fermented.
Silence! Here come the standards and banners that open the procession.
The bark porters are moving off again from their resting point.
There's the ram's head at the prow of the divine bark.
The barks of Mut, Hons, and the Pharaoh are following in order.
And you can just make out the baskets of fruit and flowers through the plumed parasols.
The front of the procession has reached the landing stage.
Ammon is hoisted on his vessel, and it swings to face the current.
But the current is strong, and the bare-chested men in the towing tugs row for all their worth.
And they'd never succeed if the men on the banks were not hauling on the cables.
Listen to the darabuka players, rhythming the oarsmen.
one behind the other, you can see the divine barks as dazzling as the sun.
The sacred fleet has reached Luxor.
Luxor, that the people call the harem of God.
And how could it be better expressed? This tender mystery that will reign over Luxor for 10 days and 10 nights, so that the world may be reborn, that the cattle may multiply, and the earth be fertile.
Take thy joy, O Ammon.
And give us joy, too, during these days of feast.
While we await thy return on the 11th day, and thy glorious descent of the Nile.
And thy return to Karnak.
Yet the twilight fell over the city of God, as it falls over all things.
The boots of the great conquerors rang on the paving stones of antiquity.
Assurbanipal the Assyrian reached the gates of Thebes and defied the ancient citadel. Alexander of Macedon wished to add the title of Pharaoh to his glories.
Caesar the Roman clutched all the Mediterranean in his eager hand and opened it only to give a last caress to conquered Egypt.
Like a tree that has grown too old, Ammon himself knew no return of spring.
But the line of Aton, born of the dream of a pharaoh who was a poet, was luckier than the patriarch of Karnak. It was the one God of Akhenaton, the Our Father of the Christians and the Muslims, who raised chapels and mosques in the dust of Thebes.
Two images in the slow twilight in which Karnak is still clinging to life.
First, the letter of one of the last ambassadors, sent to the Lebanon to try and obtain a shipment of cedars to renovate the leaking divine barks.
Woe is me, poor Unamun, in whom you place so many of your hopes. They left me to rot in the port of Byblos. I had to wait 30 days and bow and scrape 1,000 times before being received by a prince who had formerly so often trembled at the name of Ammon. He found my gifts unworthy. But I think I moved his heart, and I have arranged for the trees to be cut down and taken to the riverbank. But when can I set sail again? I see the birds migrating for the second time, flying to Egypt. How I envy them. They are making for the marshes. But for how long shall I be abandoned here?
The other image, much later, shows us the Emperor Germanicus sailing along the Nile to see the works of antiquity. He reached the ruins of Thebes and stood amazed before the silent temples and their host of hieroglyphics.
Tacitus, the historian, tells us that he saw an old man wandering among the crumbling stones.
I asked him, what does this mean? What are these strange signs on the walls? The old man of Thebes smiled. You are lucky, O Germanicus. I am the last man living, able to read the ancient language of the Egyptians, to give voice to all these birds that so astonish you. But though the testimonies of a faith may fall into ruins, they do not die. Language may be lost, but it will be found. Assurbanipal, Alexander, Caesar will pass sooner than the oracles of Karnak. Men will always return here to seek the answers to the questions that haunt them.
To the riddles of the Sphinx of that other Thebes, the Grecian Thebes, we should reply like Oedipus the king. Man.
To all the riddles here, we must reply, God.
And Ammon, who reigns forever here, is not a god to be taken lightly.
He is a god of the beginning, when the earth and the waters were still mingled, as were the animals and men. He is a complex god, as powerful as the creation.
Ammon announced the salvation of man.
He also announced the salvation of the crocodile and the scarab, everything that moves, of the flowers of the earth. He deigned to assume the guise of a ram, a falcon, goose, or a bull. He offered equality to all the companions of the universe.
And the language of the hieroglyphics is like this overwhelming faith, which, thanks to the floods of the Nile, raised these pylons, these colonnades, these obelisks.
May these hieroglyphics come to life once more, to bid farewell to you, new pilgrims to Upper Egypt. Like a sudden flight of a myriad sacred birds, their spread wings sprinkling the droplets of the river like a benediction.